Okay, I'm picking up where I just left off. So if you didn't watch the first video with introducing radians where I talked through all of this, you should. Okay, so now I've turned the page. So the terminal side of an angle, so every angle is made up of two rays. Okay, and we're always going to make our initial side right here. It's always going to be just that x-axis between quadrants 1 and 4. So this is the initial side. And then this becomes the terminal side. And so we open it up, like it starts here, it goes to there, that's a terminal side. Well, what coterminal angles are angles that have the same terminal side. So let's say I'm looking at this one right here. What I can do is I can move this direction, and I can say, well, that's pi over 3. Okay, but I also, let's use another color, I also could come this way and could come around and go in a negative direction. And so now I have gone a negative 5 pi over 3. So pi over 3 and the negative 5 pi over 3 are coterminal angles. Well, it could be that, I don't know that this pin works very well, but okay, it could be that I come in the positive direction and then I circled and I kept going and then I made it there. Okay, that looks kind of terrible. But I went 2 pi plus a little bit more. So I can also say that 7 pi over 3, this pin is going to the trash. 7 pi over 3 is also coterminal to those. So what happens is that I can keep adding or subtracting 2 pi, and I find all these different angles that terminate at the same spot. That's what coterminal angles are. They have the same terminal side. So reference angles, a reference angle must be in quadrant 1. It must live in quadrant 1, and it must be between 0 and pi over 2 if we're in radians, or 0, sorry, I was jumping ahead to where I was going, 0 or 90 degrees if we're in degrees. Okay, so it's going to live in quadrant 1. And so what it is it's the angle that we would get if we reflected back to quadrant 1. So right here, this is what, 7 pi over 6? If I reflect this back, I could reflect to here, and then that reflects back to here. And so what happens is this right here is the reference angle. Pi over 6 is the reference angle for 7 pi over 6. If I had been, this one I reflected. Another way to think about it is how far am I from the x-axis? 7 pi over 6 is pi over 6 radians away from the x-axis, and so its reference angle is pi over 6. 5 pi over 6 right here and 11 pi over 6 would also have pi over 6 as its reference angle. And pi over 6 is its own reference angle, if that makes sense. This is also, 13 pi over 6 would be coterminal. So if they said, what's the reference angle for 13 pi over 6? You'd need to tell me that it's that, pi over 6. So we'll spend a little more time on this, make sure we got it. So in this little chart, they want us to go from degrees to radians and then come up with 3 coterminal and the reference angle. So in this one, and however they give it to you here, answer in the same way here, so you get a little practice with both. With 100 degrees, we're just beyond 90, so we've gone like this. So its reference angle would be, what would happen if I reflected this back? Well, if this is 100, then this right here has to be 80, or we're 10 degrees more from 90, so we have to go 10 degrees less. So basically the reference angle it's 80 degrees. Hopefully that made sense. Coterminal angles, well, I could have come this way. So this negative 260 would work. I could also add 360 and circle a little bit more, and so 360 plus that becomes 460 would be coterminal. I could add 360 again, or 720 to that is 820. So there's 3 of them. You can come up with more. I don't feel like converting that. I did in the other video. This one, 2 pi over 5. Well, if this is pi would be 5 pi over 5, which means half of that is 2.5 pi over 5, which is terrible notation, but it does show me that this is going to be in quadrant 1. Because 2 is less than 2.5. So don't ever mix decimals and fractions, but I'm trying to show you where to put this. It may not be drawn to scale. I just care about what quadrant it's in. And so the reference angle is it is its own reference angle. And then coterminal, I'm going to add 2 pi. So if I have 2 pi over 5 and I'm adding 2 pi, well, keep in mind this would be 10 pi over 5. So I'm going to add 10 pi over 5 a few times. So I have 12 pi over 5. Can you see that? I'm sorry. I have 22 pi over 5. I can keep going. 32 pi over 5. I can also subtract 10 pi over 5 from the original. So a negative 8 pi over 5 is also coterminal. You might be aware that there are infinitely many coterminal angles. So go check my answer key for the other ones because I'm done making this video. Practice, practice, practice. It'll make more sense the more you practice.